Hey, what's going on, guys? Kyle Watts. So what I have right here is the brand new Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. This camera is going to be a massive upgrade from that first ZV-E10. So in today's video, we're going to go over all the features this thing has, all the new upgrades it has, and just do a bunch of cool examples and see how good this camera really is. So let's get right into it. So I came down here to San Diego, California to test out this camera, just see how good it really is. Brought a few different lenses with it so we can try out some other stuff as well. So the ZV-E10 Mark II is going to be a massive upgrade since the ZV-E10. They've done a lot of different things in this camera now to make this kind of on level with a lot of the other modern Sony cameras. When they originally put out the ZV-E10, they kind of used some of the old tech, but now this camera has all the new tech, including the new Sony Menu. So one of the biggest upgrades to this camera right off the bat is going to be that 10-bit 422 coloring. So you're going to go from like 8-bit, which was like 16 million colors, all the way to like 1.1 billion colors. So in post, you're really going to be able to push this camera for color grading. So because this camera has 10-bit codec, you're now able to shoot an S-Log3, which just means you're going to capture the most high dynamic range with the sensor, keeping your highlights and your shadows from clipping. And then in post, all you need to do is add that S-Log3 conversion LUT to your clip, and then it'll bring back your contrast, and then you can actually grade your footage from there. So this camera does have a lot of the color profiles like S-Log3, S-Cinetone if you guys don't want to use log footage at all, but it also has a new setting called log shooting. So if you just want to put it into log shooting, it's still going to shoot in S-Log3, but it's going to kind of give you the image of what it looks like in the back, what it would look like in post after you add your correction LUT. Now the other really cool thing is you can add user LUT, so if you already have a LUT that's your conversion LUT, you can import that straight into the camera and select that as your user LUT, so then you're going to be able to view your final image on the screen, and then in post you could still have to add that LUT, but that's one really awesome option. So another really cool thing if you're not using log shooting, is you can actually still use that user LUT and then bake in that LUT to the footage if you want to go that route instead, so that way you don't have to actually do anything in post. All right, so now the second biggest upgrade to this camera is the ability to shoot up to 4K 60 in slow motion. So the original ZV-E10 only went up to 4K 30. So before you always had to shoot that slow motion in 1080p, but now you can do 4K, which is going to be a huge thing for this camera because I mean, like, who doesn't want to shoot slow motion? And now you can do it in 4K 60. Now I usually shoot my slow motion in S and Cube because to me, I always like having it rendered in camera instead of having to do it in post. Plus also it's a little less taxing on your computer if you're shooting in 10-bit, because 10-bit 4K 60 is a little bit taxing on your computer. So if you don't have like super modern computer, it's going to be a little bit stressful sometimes if you hit spacebar and it just kind of skips. So because that is the one thing about 10-bit footage, is if you are shooting 10-bit, you have to have a computer that can still handle that. So if you guys are familiar with the Sony a6700 and the FX30, then this sensor is going to be very familiar to you because this shares the exact same sensor as that camera. So it's the backlit CMOS sensor. It's going to have really good image and video. It's going to have very good images in photography. Pretty much this sensor and this camera kind of to me look like they're on par with like the A7 IV or the A7S III. They just have a very good look and a very good image from the sensor. So just like the a6700 and the FX30, this camera also just shares the same autofocus system. So this is going to be top of the line autofocus from Sony, with the only exception is the AI focus only does human, animal, and bird. It doesn't do the train, the planes, the cars, and the insects like the a6700 does, but the autofocus system on this still shares the same points of contact with the autofocus that those other cameras do. So basically what I'm getting is the autofocus system on this, you're not going to have any issues with, because this is literally top of the line autofocus system that's shared from those cameras as well as the A7R5. All right, so now getting to the third biggest upgrade to this camera, you're going to be very happy to hear that this camera now has the Z battery. So long gone are those old batteries of the past that die after 20 minutes. So this battery will last you like half the day, if not the whole day. In fact, all day yesterday when I went shooting with this camera doing all the different things, I only used a battery and a half. So that just kind of shows you that this battery has been long overdue for this camera. Now, one of the coolest things with that is that because it has that bigger battery, now it has that really big grip. So this thing has a pretty substantial grip now. That old ZV-E10, that grip was just the worst thing ever. Like immediately I recommended getting that like small rig cage for that camera because there was nothing to hold on to. It was not great. Especially if you put a big lens on it, it was just awful. But now you have this pretty substantial grip and it's pretty nice. In fact, I even compared this to the ZV-E1. This grip is actually deeper than the ZV-E1. So I think you're going to be pretty good with this camera, unless they come out with a grip that makes it feel that much better. I can't imagine you would even need to do anything to this. So that's a really awesome feature now though, having that bigger battery and that better grip. All right, so now getting to the fourth biggest upgrade to this camera. If you take off this windscreen, you'll see the top here, it has the built-in microphone. So now this shares the same microphone as the ZV-E1. So it's going to have that kind of auto sensing front and back. If it doesn't see a face in the front, that's going to kind of go more towards the back. So this is going to be a pretty good microphone microphone for this camera, for an internal microphone, it's definitely a huge improvement over those previous microphones from different Sony cameras. But in a pinch, this is going to work just fine, so you don't necessarily need to bring around a microphone with you. I would still take a look at those like Sony hot shoe microphones though, because that will still make this camera a much better sounding camera. In fact, if you guys want to hear what the microphone sounds like on this with different microphones, I do have another video up here. This is from the Sony ZV-E1, but because it shares the same microphone, it's still going to sound the same. And then also you do kind of get an improved furry windscreen for the top. This is going to do a little bit better in the wind versus the kind of old previous one. It's just a little bit more fuzzy and kind of gets in the way of the wind. So, all right, so if you look at the top of the camera on the layout, you'll see that it looks very familiar. It still looks like the ZV-E10. It still has that selectable dial switch for photo, video, and slow and quick. It also still has that record button. It has the defocus button, and it has the zoom rocker. So if you're using this camera in like auto settings, that defocus button, all that's going to do is that when you hit that, it's going to drop your lens to the lowest aperture it can to try to give you that kind of blurry background. So then if you hit the button again, it's going to bring up the f-stop on the lens, and it's going to make the background look more in focus. So it's going to do that with an auto exposure setup, but that system only really works in the auto settings, because if you use it in manual mode, it's not going to do much. For me, I still always shoot in manual, so it's not a big deal for me, but you can also reprogram that button to be something else if you want. So if you guys are shooting in manual settings, now you have two different selectable buttons on top. So this camera does still have that kind of product showcase mode, so it's going to be similar to what you had on the ZV-E10. Right now we're shooting on the Sony ZV-E1. This also has it. So if I lift the camera up, it's going to automatically focus to the camera, even if my face is exposed. That's a really cool setting if you guys are doing a lot of videos where you're showcasing products, and it's really fast. I mean, it locks in pretty quick. So, but if you don't want to use that product showcase button, that button, once again, also customizable. So if you want to customize and set up your camera, you can totally do that. So Sony has moved away from that Imaging Edge app, and now they have the Creator app. So if you want to be able to hook this camera up, you can go to your Creator app, download that. That way you can actually send your photos to your camera wirelessly. So if you want to like take photos and then quick edit on the fly, you can do that really quick. It is sending a lower resolution to your phone, but if you're just using something for like Instagram and you want to do a quick edit, it's gonna be perfect for that. In fact, while I've been here in San Diego, I've actually been uploading a lot of my photos to my phone, doing quick edits, and then posting them on Instagram. So that brings us to our last big upgrade to this camera, and that is the new Sony Menu system. So Sony has moved away from that old system, and they are now using the new menu system on all the new cameras. And that also includes this camera. So if you guys are familiar with the ZV-E10, you'll know that that menu is just a mess. The new Sony menu is so much easier. It's all touch screen. It has a lot of cool features like my menu settings, where you can save all your like kind of go-to things on the top bar so that you can get to them quicker. But then also like the Sony ZV-E1, it's going to have a new thing on the screen, where on the sides of the screen it's going to come in. You're going to have like 4 buttons on each side, and it's going to be things like your record button. It's going to have a zoom button where you can change your zoom from like a 1.5K crop, or you can zoom in on it. It's also going to have like your eye focus for animal, bird, and human. It's going to have a bunch of different things. There's a record button as well, but then it also has the new Cine Vlog. So if you hit the Cine Vlog, you're going to get the like black bars on the top and bottom, so it's going to give you that kind of 23:9 aspect ratio, kind of like a cinematic movie. And you can control different settings and color temperatures and stuff in that mode. So if you want to make it so you put a different LUT on that, you can do that. That way you get a cool like cinematic sequence. So if you're doing some kind of fun B-roll, that's a really cool feature. Something that probably isn't getting used a lot, but it's there if you need it, which is really cool. One of the other really cool things that I like about that new menu system, instead of hitting your function button, now from the screen you can just swipe up and it brings up your function menu for all your like quick actions. So the function menu is where I kind of keep all my settings, to where if you need to change something quick on the fly, that's where I like to put them myself, so that you can just open up your functions, switch something, go back and start filming. In fact, if you guys haven't yet, I'm going to be doing a menu setup for this camera. So if you guys want like my settings and how I set up my camera, I'm going to be putting out that video shortly. So subscribe to the channel if you want to follow along to that video. Hit that bell and you'll be notified of that video. But anyways, you guys, the new Sony menu system is far better than the old one. So huge improvement for this camera once again. So now looking at the side of the camera here, you'll see on these flip doors, you're going to have your microphone input on the top for 3.5mm. You're going to have your USB-C cable. Below that, you're going to have your SD card slot, which is a single SD card. Now for the SD card slot, you're actually using a OSS II SD card. So you want to probably get like a V60 or a V90. That's going to be good enough for this camera. In fact, I think all you need for the 60 frames per second in S&Q is the V60. And then below that here you have your micro HDMI. So if you guys are running outputs to an external monitor, you can use that micro HDMI. And then it also has a headphone jack. So if you want to like listen to audio while you're filming someone else from the camera, you can do that as well. So the lens that I actually have on the camera right now is the brand new power zoom lens from Sony. This is the new 16-50 OSS II. So it's still a 3.5 aperture to a 5.6 variable aperture, but it's just their new version of this lens. So it's a kit lens. If you guys want to stick with the kit lens, it's still a pretty good lens. I would recommend getting an upgraded lens in the future if you can, but if you need to start with the 16-55, is still an option that you can use. It does have that power zoom, and it also still works with that zoom rocker, which is really nice. Now for vlogging purposes, that 16 is going to get pretty close, especially if you're in like active stabilization, but it does have standard stabilization built into this. So if you're vlogging, I would recommend using the standard stabilization on this camera, not the active. And then you're going to get that 16mm focal range, which is actually like a 24mm full frame equivalent. Now, if you are looking for a cool vlog lens, Sony does sell a 11mm vlog lens. If you want one that has a zoom, there is the 10-18 still from the past, which is an f4. It's kind of an older lens. Otherwise, the lens that I have been using for vlogging on this trip is the Sigma 10-18. I like that lens because it's an f2.8. It's pretty small, and optically, it's a really great lens. So if you are looking for a vlog lens, I would recommend a couple of those. If you want to see the ones that I've been shooting in this video, it's the Sigma 10-18. So just like all the new Sony cameras, this camera does have the flip out screen, the articulating screen. So if you need to vlog, you can flip it open, tip it back at you. Now I will say, if you're shooting out in really sunny modes, the screen does look kind of dark. There isn't sunny mode setting you can change it to, but being in really sunny San Diego right now, it's still been pretty hard to actually see the image on the screen. So I've just been looking at the exposure meter, just trying to get my exposure correct when I'm doing photography and video. So I would like to see in the future maybe Sony putting out a better screen, but I get it, it's a $1,000 camera, so you're going to probably have to cut some costs somewhere, and the screen's probably going to be one of those. Now, if we're taking a look at photography, the one thing with this camera that is different than the ZV-E10 is they have now moved to the electronic shutter instead of the mechanical shutter. Now, outdoors, it really doesn't matter having that electronic shutter versus like a mechanical shutter. Now, the only time you're going to really notice anything different there is that if you're in like indoors with LEDs, you might get some weird banding or kind of LED striping, and that's just kind of something that comes with the electronic shutter. I'm not sure why they switched away from the mechanical shutter to the electronic, because I do like the mechanical shutter better, but this thing still takes incredible photos. So here's a little montage of all the photos I took here in San Diego. You can kind of judge for yourself.
All I want is satisfaction. Make a move, baby, you got nothing to lose. Give me that good reaction. Gonna make it right, little like an offer I can't refuse. I'm on the road, it's my time, taking control of my life. I want to run the red lights, I've got to run this show. You always take me so high, you always make the highlights. I love the way we vibe, you're like a centerfold. Ooh, that's really sweet, you got what I need. Sipping on the potion, all that good emotion, just my kind of heat. Keep it on repeat.
All right, so the next question you guys are probably going to definitely ask is, does this camera overheat? Now, I've been shooting out here in very hot, very sunny weather all weekend. I've been shooting in slow motion. I've been doing a lot of photographies. The camera has gotten warm, but I think that's more from just the sun from the camera. But I have not one time seen that overheating dial even show up on the screen, because when you first set this camera up, it asks you if you want to switch it to the high temperature setting. So you select high temperature, and then you shouldn't have to worry about it. And I've also been shooting on the Sony ZV-E10 all weekend, and since that firmware update on that camera has not also overheated on me, not one time. So to answer your question, if you're just shooting like content creation and vlogging, you're not gonna have any issue with this. Now, if you're shooting for a very long period of time, like an hour, I don't know yet, because I haven't had the ability to sit down and do like a long talking head with this video or live stream. But if it's anything like the Sony ZV-E10 since that firmware update, I don't think you're gonna have any issues. So that just brings us to the question, who's this camera for? So this camera is going to be for anyone under that $1,000 budget. In fact, this camera is still worth more than a $1,000 budget. This camera is basically the A6700 minus a few features at $400 or $500 cheaper. So if you guys are like vloggers, if you guys are content creators, if you do a lot of like travel videos, this camera is awesome for this. I wish this camera would have been out like 4 or 5 years ago, because this thing would have been a huge upgrade to any channel's video for as far as quality. So with this camera, you get really good visuals, you get really good slow motion, you get really good 4K footage, you get a higher dynamic range than the previous cameras. And if you throw on different lenses, that's the cool thing with these interchangeable lenses, is that you can put on whatever lens you want. So for like half the trip, I've been using this kit lens, I've been using that Sigma 10 to 18, I've been using the 70 to 200 GM Mark II, which is a ridiculous lens for this camera, because that is like a $3,000 lens, but it just showcases you the images that you can even achieve with a cheaper camera. But there's so many lenses out there that for aps-c specifically that are like a fraction of the cost of those full frames. So if you guys are looking to check out a camera that's going to look like something like the A7 IV or A7S III, check out this camera, because it's going to be a really good workhorse of a camera for creators. So if you guys already have like the FX30 or the A6700, this is the perfect B cam for that, because basically it's the same camera. So all you have to do is set it up the same way you're doing your other camera, and it's going to look the same. So no, because you're going to ask, let's see what this camera looks like actually vlogging with it. All right, so this is an example of just using the internal microphone on this camera, as well as the Sigma 10 to 18, holding this thing just directly under the lens. We are in active stabilization, so this is just what it looks like with that crop. All right, so if you take this thing out of active stabilization and turn off the stabilization, this is what the 10mm looks like, just holding it directly under the lens. So you can see there's still a bit of shake, but it is pretty wide. All right, so now I changed it over to the kit lens. This is the 16 to 50. I'm in standard stabilization because this lens actually allows you to use the lens's stabilization instead of just the camera body. Since there's no IBIS in this actual camera, it only has that digital active stabilization. So that's what mode I would use if you have this lens, because this lens is stabilized. We're also using now the Sony M1 microphone. So this is just how much better that sounds compared to the internal microphone. So if you want to upgrade, this is a good upgrade. Let me turn it to active stabilization to show you what that looks like. That's going to add like a 1.1 crop, so you will see a significant tighter shot. So let's check that out. Okay, so this is the 60mm in active stabilization. I'm walking on sand, so this should be really bad. You'll see it probably looks pretty smooth, but it does come with a little bit of that crop. So from my opinion, I would not probably use the active stabilization while vlogging with this camera unless you have like a long selfie stick, because this one just doesn't leave enough room in the background. So now if you do want to use that active stabilization, check out the Sigma 10 to 18 or the Sony 11, because those lenses are going to be really good for width. And that 10 to 18 is going to be good because it's going to give you a variety of different like focal ranges. All right, so another really cool thing that Sony has already had in this camera, but no one ever seems to use it, are those like creative color modes. They actually do look really cool. And now with the height of like a lot of those Fuji cameras kind of having like the vintage looks and kind of the preset looks, this camera still has that as well, just no one really ever talks about it. So if you guys want to go into your creative coloring settings, there's standard, which you would want to shoot on if you're shooting anything standard that you're going to correct in post. But if you want to like go into those other modes, there's some really cool modes in there, whether you have like your vintage or your kind of vivid, black and white. I think there's a sepia. There's a whole bunch of different ones in this camera. So if you guys are looking at buying like those Fuji cameras just because it has those, this camera still has that as well. Just people don't really ever talk about it. All right, so if you guys are looking at picking one of these up, I'll put links down below in the description of where you can find this. It's probably going to be available first as a pre-order, but if you guys are watching this after the release of this camera, also the links will be down below of where you can purchase this. If you guys have any other questions about this camera, absolutely leave me a question down below. I'll get back to you. And if you guys want to follow along to other content with this camera, as well as other Sony content, please hit that subscribe button down below, follow the channel, and as always guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Later. I mean, come on, do you think I'm just gonna leave this camera here? Of course I'm not gonna. It's ridiculous. Let's go.